The screen glowed white in the darkened conference room, casting harsh shadows across 12 faces that had stopped pretending to look anywhere but at the numbers. Skybridge Airline's stock ticker crawled across the bottom, down 8% in after-hours trading, hemorrhaging $12 million every hour. The video kept spreading. Someone had muted the audio, but the footage needed no sound. A black man in a gray hoodie, blood trailing from his temple, being dragged down an aircraft aisle by 2 officers while 100 phones captured every second. The boardroom had gone silent 3 minutes ago when the timestamp appeared, 72 hours earlier. Marcus Bennett sat at the head of the table, spine straight, hands folded, watching his own assault play out for the 5th time that morning. His temple still ached where the stitches pulled when he turned his head too quickly. The others kept stealing glances at him, waiting for rage or tears or some human reaction that would let them categorize what came next. He gave them nothing, just that same calm that had unsettled them since he walked back onto that plane in a $6,000 suit and ended 4 careers with 6 words. "I own this airline, remember?" The video froze on his face, blood and tears mixing while Officer Wilson's knee pressed into his spine. Richard Cole, the silver-haired chairman who had taken Marcus's call from that holding cell, cleared his throat. "We should discuss the PR strategy." Marcus raised one finger. The room went silent again. He touched the remote and the screen shifted to a different image. Not the viral video, not the news coverage. An internal document 3 years old marked confidential. Employee Complaint Form 4478-B. Passenger name redacted. Crew members named Emma Roberts, Daniel Carter. Incident description. Asked to prove business class ticket 3 times despite showing valid boarding pass. Resolution. Crew counseled on customer service protocols. Case closed. Another click. Complaint 4512-C. Same crew, different passenger, same outcome. Click, click, click. 47 complaints in 3 years spread across the table like an autopsy report. Marcus let them look, let them understand that the video everyone had seen was just the moment the infection finally broke through the skin. 72 hours ago, Marcus said, his voice carrying that particular quiet that made boardrooms lean forward. "I walked into SeaTac Airport dressed like I was going to the gym. Expensive clothes, but nothing with a logo, nothing that screamed CEO or billionaire or don't you know who I am. I wanted to see what my airline looked like when people thought I was nobody." He stood, walked to the window. Seattle's skyline cut through morning fog. All glass and steel, and the promise that anyone could build something here if they worked hard enough. Marcus had believed that once, back when he was 20 and broke and sitting in seat 12C on a different airline, watching a flight attendant escort him back to economy because a white woman wanted his seat. And someone had decided her comfort mattered more than his ticket. "I was 20 years old," Marcus continued, still facing the window. "Junior at Washington State, saved for 6 months to buy that ticket because I had an interview at Boeing. First real shot at an engineering internship. The woman who took my seat, she didn't even look at me, just settled in like I was a problem that had solved itself." He turned back to the table. Dr. Jennifer Foster, the COO, was the only one meeting his eyes. The others studied their phones or the table or anything that wasn't the man whose company they served but whose experience they would never share. "I missed that interview. Boeing went with someone else. Took me 3 more years to get another shot." Marcus moved back to his seat, didn't sit. "I built Skybridge because I wanted one airline where that couldn't happen. Where the rules applied to everyone, where your boarding pass was your boarding pass and nothing else mattered." Richard Cole shifted in his chair. The movement was small, but Marcus caught it. 15 years building this company, and he still had to watch them calculate whether justice would cost more than slints. "The video has 42 million views," Jennifer said, pulling up her tablet. "CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, everyone's running it. The hashtags are trending in 17 countries, but Marcus, the stock will recover. It always does. We apologize, we settle, we move forward. Marcus picked up the remote again. One more click. This time the screen filled with a spreadsheet. Revenue projections, market share analysis, projected growth through 2028. All the numbers that said Skybridge was winning. I spent 15 years building this, Marcus said. 15 years proving that a kid from Tacoma who got kicked out of his seat could build something better. And 3 days ago, I walked onto my own airplane and got treated exactly like I did at 20. Because Sarah Mitchell at the counter saw a black man in a hoodie and decided I needed extra verification. Because Robert Hayes at TSA saw the same thing and decided I looked suspicious. Because Karen Wells at the gate saw the same thing and flagged my ticket. Because Emma Roberts and Daniel Carter and Captain Thomas Bradford saw the same thing and decided Victoria Hayes, who wasn't even on the right flight, belonged in my seat more than I did. The room had gone still again. This wasn't the Marcus they knew from quarterly reports and investor calls. This was something older, sharper, with edges they didn't have language for. I paid $2,400 for that seat. I showed my boarding pass 7 times. I complied with every request, answered every question, stayed calm while they called me aggressive, stayed silent while they called me threatening. He touched his temple, felt the ridge of stitches under his fingers. I did everything right, and they still cuffed me so tight my hands went numb. Still dragged me down that aisle like I was cargo, still made sure everyone on that plane knew that a black man, no matter how much money he had or how many companies he built, could be erased the second someone decided he didn't belong. Jennifer's voice was soft. What do you want to do? Marcus looked at her. She was 50, brilliant, had been with him since the beginning when Skybridge was 3 planes and a prayer. She had a daughter at Howard, a son at Morehouse. She knew. I want every person involved fired. I want criminal charges filed. I want every complaint in that pile investigated. I want the HR director who buried 47 incidents terminated with cause. He paused, made sure they heard the next part. And I want this company to mean what I built it to mean. Not on a press release, in practice. Every day, every flight, every passenger. Richard started to speak. Marcus cut him off with a look. The Boeing contract I was flying to sign? $300 million. They pulled out this morning because they don't want to be associated with this. $300 million because my own employees decided I looked like someone who steals seats. He let that sink in. But here's what I learned in that holding cell while Officer Wilson's handcuffs cut into my wrists. And I could taste blood from where my head hit the armrest. This company either stands for something real or it stands for nothing at all. There's no middle ground anymore. Someone's phone buzzed, then another. Jennifer looked down, her face shifting. She turned her tablet so Marcus could see. The Wall Street Journal, posted 3 minutes ago. Skybridge CEO's arrest sparks federal investigation into airline discrimination practices. FAA announced a formal inquiry, Jennifer said. They're reviewing all complaints filed against Skybridge in the past 5 years, and Justice Department just confirmed they're launching a civil rights investigation. The room erupted, voices overlapping, someone saying class action, someone else mentioning shareholder lawsuits. Richard already on his phone with the legal team. Marcus sat down, finally, and watched them panic. Let them feel a fraction of what he'd felt when those handcuffs clicked shut. And he understood with absolute clarity that his money and his company and his success meant nothing to the people who only saw his skin. He waited until the chaos crested, then spoke one word. Good. They froze. Good, Marcus repeated. Let them investigate. Let them find every complaint we buried, every passenger we failed, every moment we chose convenience over justice. He stood again, walked toward the door. Board meeting adjourned. I have calls to make. Marcus, wait. Richard's voice carried that particular blend of concern and calculation that Marcus had learned to recognize in white men who suddenly realized the rules they'd written might apply to them. "We need a unified response. Legal says, Marcus stopped, hand on the door, didn't turn around. "Legal can say whatever they want in their depositions. I'm not settling. I'm not making this go away quietly. 72 hours ago, I was just another black man who didn't know his place. Now I'm the CEO who's going to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else on my airline. You can be part of that, or you can be part of the problem. Your choice." He left them there, walked past his assistant who tried to hand him messages, past the executive suite with its leather furniture and panoramic views, down to the operations floor where the real work happened. People looked up as he passed, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, a few with something that might have been respect. He found Jessica Williams at her desk, headphones on, fingers flying across a keyboard. She was 28, had worked her way up from gate agent to operations analyst in 5 years, and had sent him an encrypted email from a burner account 2 months ago that he hadn't fully understood until 3 days ago. He tapped her desk. She looked up, pulled off the headphones, her eyes widened. "Mr. Bennett, you sent me an email. February 14th. Subject line, patterns." Marcus pulled over a chair, sat, watched her decide whether to play dumb or play brave. "You attached 47 complaint forms that our HR director marked resolved. You flagged 17 where the same crew members were named multiple times. You wrote one sentence, 'This isn't random.'" Jessica's hands gripped the edge of her desk. "I thought you should know. Why didn't you come to me directly?" She met his eyes and he saw it, the fear that came with being young and black and knowing that speaking up could cost you everything. "Because I didn't know if you'd believe me, or if you did, if you'd do anything about it." Marcus felt that like a blade. She worked for him, for a company he'd built specifically to be different, and she still didn't trust the system to protect her, because she was smart enough to know that good intentions meant nothing against the weight of institutional indifference. "I believe you," he said, "and I'm doing something about it. Starting with this, you're reassigned effective immediately. New title, Director of Passenger Equity and Safety, direct report to me. Your job is to review every complaint filed in the past 5 years, interview every passenger who filed one, and build a case so airtight that nobody can sweep this under the rug ever again." Jessica's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I don't have experience." "You had the integrity to risk your job sending me that email. That's the only qualification that matters." Marcus stood, handed her his card with his direct line. "I need a full report in 3 days. Everything. No filters, no politics, no making it pretty, the truth. Can you do that?" She nodded, and he saw her shoulders straighten, saw her become the person she'd always been, but had never been allowed to be. "Yes, sir." "One more thing." Marcus paused at her cubicle entrance. "That email saved my life, not literally maybe, but it reminded me why I built this company, so thank you." He left her there, headed for the elevators, the executive floor again, but this time to his private office, the one with the door that locked and the windows that didn't open and the walls that had absorbed 15 years of victories and defeats. He sat at his desk, pulled out his phone, scrolled past 73 unread messages to the one that mattered. The video Maya Anderson had live-streamed was still playing somewhere, still spreading, still forcing people to watch a moment that black people in America had been living with forever. But there was another video, one that hadn't gone viral yet, security footage from SeaTac, time-stamped 73 hours ago. Marcus in line at the check-in counter, waiting patiently while Sarah Mitchell helped the 3 passengers ahead of him. All white, all processed in under 2 minutes each. Then Marcus stepping forward and Sarah's face changing. That subtle shift from professional to suspicious, so practiced it almost looked natural. He watched himself hand over his ID and boarding pass. Watched Sarah scan it once, frown, scan it again. Watched her call over her supervisor even though the system showed no flu, no problems, nothing that would justify the delay. Watched himself stay calm, stay polite, stay everything that black people had to be to survive encounters that white people never even noticed. The next clip, TSA screening. Robert Hayes directing Marcus to the special screening area while 3 white passengers walked through the metal detector without a second glance. Marcus complying, arms outstretched while Hayes patted him down with the kind of thoroughness usually reserved for people on watch lists. The expression on Marcus's face, patient, knowing, unsurprised. Then the gate. Karen Wells scanning his boarding pass 3 times, each swipe accompanied by a deepening frown, calling her supervisor. Marcus showing his ID again, his credit card, his Skybridge employee badge that he'd kept in his wallet specifically for this test. Karen ignoring all of it, insisting the system showed an error even though the screen clearly displayed his name, his seat, his confirmation code. Finally, the cabin footage. Victoria Hayes settling into 2A like it was her ancestral throne. Emma Roberts arriving and immediately siding with her without checking Marcus's ticket. Daniel Carter backing her up. Captain Bradford refusing to look at evidence. The slow, methodical escalation from inconvenience to humiliation to violence, all captured in high definition from 4 different angles. Marcus had all of it. Every second, every microaggression that people would call isolated incidents or honest mistakes or unfortunate misunderstandings. 47 other passengers had their own videos, their own stories, their own moments of being treated like threats or liars or people who didn't belong. And Marcus was going to make sure every single one of them got heard. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered anyway. Mr. Bennett, this is Special Agent David Morrison, FBI Civil Rights Division. I'd like to schedule an interview regarding the incident on Flight 932. Marcus leaned back in his chair, looked out at the Seattle skyline he'd once dreamed of conquering. When would you like to meet? As soon as possible. We're also interested in the internal complaints you mentioned in your board meeting this morning. Marcus smiled, though there was nothing happy in it. How did you know about my board meeting? A pause. We've been monitoring Skybridge's complaint history for the past 6 months. Your incident simply accelerated our timeline. 6 months. Right around the time Jessica sent that email. Marcus closed his eyes, felt pieces clicking into place. Did a Jessica Williams contact you? I can't confirm or deny. She doesn't need protection from me, Agent Morrison. She needs protection from the people who've been burying these complaints for years. Marcus opened his eyes. I'll meet with you. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., my office. And I'm bringing my lawyer, my COO, and every piece of evidence we've collected. This goes all the way to trial if it has to. No settlements, no quiet resolutions. We do this in public or we don't do it at all. Another pause. That's unusual, Mr. Bennett. Most companies prefer to handle these matters privately. I'm not most companies. Marcus ended the call. His assistant knocked, poked her head in. Sir, CNN wants a statement. So does the Times, the Post, and about 40 other outlets. Tell them I'll hold a press conference tomorrow at noon. Full statement, open questions, live streamed. She blinked. Legal said, legal works for me. Set it up. She disappeared. Marcus pulled up his email, started typing. 2. All Skybridge employees. Subject, what happens next? He wrote for 20 minutes, deleted it, started over, deleted again. Finally settled on something simple, true, and harder than anything he'd ever written. 3 days ago, I experienced what hundreds of our passengers have experienced. Being judged not by my ticket or my conduct, but by my appearance. I was removed from my own airplane because the crew saw a black man in a hoodie and assumed I didn't belong. This is unacceptable. It ends now. Effective immediately, Skybridge is implementing the following changes. All discrimination complaints will be reviewed by an independent board with full authority to investigate and recommend termination. All customer-facing employees will complete quarterly bias training, designed and led by civil rights experts, not corporate consultants. All crew members will wear body cameras, and all aircraft will be equipped with cabin recording systems. Footage will be available to passengers upon request. These changes will be expensive. They will be uncomfortable. Some of you will object. But this company was built on the principle that every passenger deserves respect and dignity. We failed to live up to that. Starting today, we fix it. He hit send. Watched the email disappear into the system, knowing it would trigger resignations, lawsuits, maybe even a shareholder revolt. Knowing he'd just made himself a target for every person who thought discrimination was bad in theory but too expensive to fix in practice. His phone exploded with responses. Jennifer, this is bold, I'm with you. Richard, we need to discuss this. Legal, call me immediately. Sarah Montgomery, the HR director. You can't do this without board approval. Marcus replied to Sarah. You're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Your severance is voided pending investigation. Do not contact any current employees. To legal, I'm the majority shareholder. I just did. To Richard, nothing to discuss. This is happening. To Jennifer, thank you. I need you to take over HR until we find someone who understands that protecting passengers is more important than protecting the company's reputation. He stood, walked to the window again. Below, the city moved through its rhythms, people getting on planes and trains and buses without ever thinking about whether they'd be treated like human beings or problems to be solved. Most of them would never know what it felt like to show your boarding pass 7 times and still be called a liar. To do everything right and still end up in handcuffs. To build a company from nothing and still be seen as someone who didn't belong. But some of them knew. The ones who sent Jessica their complaints and got form letters in response. The ones who called customer service and got transferred until they gave up. The ones who stopped flying Skybridge because they learned over and over that their dignity was negotiable. Marcus was done negotiating. His phone buzzed, text from a number he didn't recognize. This is Dr. James Robinson. I was on your flight to Atlanta in 2023. They accused me of stealing a blanket from first class. I'm a cardiovascular surgeon. I filed a complaint. Nothing happened. Thank you for finally doing something. Another text, Reverend Michael Brown, Flight 847, 2024. They told me my kind didn't belong in the exit row. I'm a pastor. I counsel trauma victims. I stopped flying your airline. I'll come back now. They kept coming. Professor David Harris, Maria Santos, Kenneth Lee. 47 names from those complaint files, and more beyond that, people who'd never filed officially but had carried the memory of being dismissed, diminished, erased. Marcus responded to each one personally, apologized, thanked them, asked if they'd be willing to meet, to share their stories, to help him understand everywhere the system had failed, so he could make sure it never failed anyone else. By the time he finished, it was dark outside. The office had emptied hours ago. His temple throbbed where the stitches pulled. His wrists still bore faint marks from the handcuffs, thin lines that would fade but never quite disappear. He thought about that 20-year-old kid on his way to Boeing, so sure that hard work and talent would be enough. Thought about the 15 years he'd spent building something that was supposed to be different, only to discover that good intentions were worthless without constant, uncomfortable vigilance. Thought about Maya Anderson, 16 years old, who'd had the courage to hit record when everyone else looked away. Her video had ended with him being dragged off the plane. But there was another video, one only he and the FBI and his board had seen, the one where he came back, where he stood in that cabin, blood still drying on his temple, and said 5 words that had already been clipped and shared and turned into memes. I own this airline, remember? People thought that was the power move, the moment of triumph. Marcus knew better. The real moment had come after, in the silence that followed, when he looked at Emma Roberts and Daniel Carter and Captain Bradford and saw not enemies but casualties of a system that had taught them, over and over, that some people mattered more than others. when he'd had to choose between revenge and repair, between punishment and transformation. He'd chosen both, because some people needed to lose their jobs to understand they'd failed. But the company needed to change so deeply that those jobs could never fail anyone else the same way again. His phone rang one more time. Maya Anderson's mother, according to the caller ID. "Mr. Bennett, this is Patricia Anderson. My daughter live-streamed what happened to you." Marcus braced himself for a lawsuit, a demand, an accusation that he'd traumatized a child by making her witness violence. "Yes, ma'am. She wants to know if she can interview you for a project she's doing on systemic racism and corporate accountability." Patricia's voice carried something between pride and worry. "She's 16. I told her she was being presumptuous, but she insisted I call." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "Tell Maya I'd be honored, and tell her thank you. What she did took courage most adults don't have. She said you never yelled, never fought back, just stood there and let them prove who they were." Patricia paused. "My husband and I have been teaching her about civil rights, about dignity, about how change happens. We never expected her to have a front-row seat." "None of us expected this," Marcus said. "But she made sure the world saw. That matters more than you know." After he hung up, Marcus pulled up Maya's video one more time, watched it without the boardroom audience, without the pressure to perform strength or wisdom or anything other than what he'd felt in that moment. Fear and fury and a bone-deep weariness at having to prove again and again that he deserved basic human decency. The video ended with him being escorted off the plane, disappeared into the jet bridge and out of frame. But Marcus knew the rest of the story. Knew about the holding cell and the phone call and the moment he'd decided that silence was complicity and complicity was surrender. Tomorrow he'd hold a press conference. Tomorrow he'd meet with the FBI. Tomorrow he'd start the work of transforming a company that had failed its mission in the most fundamental way possible. But tonight, alone in his office with the city lights below and the weight of 47 broken promises pressing down, Marcus let himself feel it, all of it. The humiliation and the rage and the exhaustion of being constantly measured against standards that shifted based on his skin. He let himself feel it, and then he set it aside, because feeling wasn't enough. Feeling never had been. He opened his laptop, pulled up the draft policy Jennifer had sent, Skybridge Dignity Initiative, Comprehensive Implementation Plan, started reading, started editing, started building the thing he should have built 15 years ago, before the first complaint was filed and buried, before the pattern became policy, before his own employees learned that discrimination was acceptable as long as it stayed quiet. The work would take years, cost millions, make enemies. But Marcus had learned something in that holding cell, something that Maya's video had confirmed. The world was watching now, not just Skybridge. Every airline, every company, every person who'd ever been judged by their appearance instead of their actions. They were all being tested, and this time Marcus was going to make sure they all passed. The press conference was scheduled for noon, but the media had camped outside Skybridge headquarters since dawn. Marcus watched them from his office window, counting satellite trucks. 17. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, local affiliates, international outlets he didn't recognize. A circus, Jennifer had called it. Marcus called it accountability with an audience. His lawyer, Bernard Shaw, sat across the desk reviewing talking points Marcus had already decided to ignore. Bernard was 60, had guided Skybridge through acquisitions and regulatory fights and 2 near bankruptcies in the early years. Smart, careful, allergic to risk. "You don't have to do this," Bernard said for the 3rd time that morning. "A written statement would suffice. Live questions invite disaster." Marcus pulled on his suit jacket, the same Tom Ford he'd worn walking back onto that plane. The bloodstain had been professionally removed, but he could still see the shadow of it if he looked close enough. Some stains went deeper than fabric. I'm not hiding. I'm not suggesting hiding. I'm suggesting strategy. Bernard set down the talking points. The FBI interview is in 20 minutes. After that, you'll be under federal investigation. Anything you say publicly can be used to hold people accountable. That's the point. Marcus checked his reflection in the window. Tie straight, expression calm, stitches visible if you knew to look. Good, let them see the evidence. The strategy is transparency. We failed passengers, we buried complaints, we built a system that let Emma Roberts and Daniel Carter abuse people for years. I'm not spinning that. I'm fixing it. Bernard stood, gathered his papers. Old school, still used physical files instead of tablets. You're betting everything that the public cares more about justice than profit. That's a dangerous bet. It's the only bet worth making. They walked together through hallways that felt different now. Every conversation stopping when Marcus passed, every employee suddenly fascinated by their phones. Fear or respect, he couldn't tell. Maybe both. The executive conference room had been converted into a media center. Cameras already set up, lighting tested. Jennifer waited by the door, tablet in hand, wearing the expression she got when numbers didn't add up the way they should. Stocks down another 6%. Shareholders are demanding an emergency meeting. 3 board members have tendered resignations pending your acceptance. Marcus filed that away. The FBI? Waiting in your office, Agent Morrison and someone from the Civil Rights Division. She glanced at Bernard. They have a warrant for all HR records going back 5 years. Give them everything, no delays, no redactions. Marcus turned to Bernard. Make sure legal cooperates fully. If anyone tries to hide documents, fire them. Bernard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. 15 years of partnership meant knowing when Marcus had made up his mind past the point of argument. The walk back to his office took 90 seconds. Marcus used them to center himself, draw on the patience he'd learned in that holding cell when panic would have made everything worse. Special Agent David Morrison looked exactly like his voice suggested. Late 40s, ex-military posture, eyes that cataloged everything. His partner was younger, black woman with a briefcase instead of a badge visible. She extended her hand first. Assistant Attorney General Nicole Patterson, Civil Rights Division. Thank you for meeting with us, Mr. Bennett. They settled into chairs arranged around the conference table in Marcus's office, the view of Seattle serving as backdrop. Patterson pulled out a recorder, stated date and time and names present. Official, binding, exactly what Marcus wanted. Mr. Bennett, walk us through the events of Flight 932, starting from when you arrived at SeaTac. Marcus did. Every detail. Sarah Mitchell's extra verification at check-in, Robert Hayes's invasive pat-down at TSA, Karen Wells's repeated scanning at the gate, the pattern of microaggressions building like water behind a dam, each one small enough to dismiss, together adding up to something deliberate. He described boarding the plane, seeing Victoria Hayes in his seat, showing his boarding pass to Emma Roberts 7 times while she refused to verify it against the manifest. Daniel Carter backing Emma without question. Captain Bradford refusing to check the system. The call to security. The handcuffs clicking shut, too tight. Circulation stopping in his fingers. His head hitting the armrest when Officer Wilson pulled him from the seat. The taste of copper. The chorus of gasps from passengers who saw but didn't intervene. Patterson took notes on a yellow legal pad, old-fashioned like Bernard's files. Morrison watched Marcus's face, looking for cracks or lies or the performance of trauma. You stayed calm throughout. Not a question. Marcus answered anyway. I've had practice. This wasn't the first time. Just the first time I had the power to do something about it afterward. Tell me about the phone call you made from the holding cell. I called my chairman. Told him to ground the flight, return it to the gate. He asked why. I told him to check security footage, then do what I said. Morrison leaned forward. You knew they'd comply. I'm the majority shareholder and founder. My contract gives me operational authority in matters of safety and security. A CEO being unlawfully arrested on his own aircraft qualifies. Unlawfully. Patterson wrote that down. You're saying Officer Wilson and Officer Stevens violated your civil rights. I'm saying they saw a black man and assumed threat. They ignored evidence, escalated without cause, and used excessive force. The video shows me complying at every step. They arrested me anyway. Marcus touched his temple where the stitches pulled. The only thing I did wrong was exist in a space where they'd already decided I didn't belong. The questions continued for 90 minutes. Patterson wanted specific quotes, exact timestamps, names of witnesses. Morrison focused on procedure, asking about Skybridge's training protocols, complaint resolution system, HR oversight. Marcus answered everything, volunteered details they hadn't asked for, pointed them toward Jessica's encrypted email and the 47 buried complaints. Finally, Patterson clicked off the recorder. We'll need to interview the crew members, Emma Roberts, Daniel Carter, Captain Bradford. They've been suspended pending investigation. Legal has their contact information. And Victoria Hayes? Marcus smiled without humor. Not my employee, but I imagine she'll be hearing from her own lawyers soon. Morrison stood, extended his hand. Firm grip, assessing. Most CEOs in your position would be demanding we make this disappear quietly. Why are you pushing for public investigation? Because disappearing quietly is how we got here. 47 complaints buried, dozens of passengers dismissed, years of pattern and practice that nobody wanted to acknowledge because fixing it would cost money and comfort. Marcus met his eyes. I'm done protecting comfort at the expense of dignity. Patterson gathered her materials. We'll be in touch. Expect this to take several months, grand jury depositions, possibly trial if we move forward with charges. I'll be available whenever you need me. After they left, Marcus had 15 minutes before the press conference. He used them to review Jessica's preliminary report, delivered at midnight and running to 63 pages. She'd interviewed 32 of the 47 passengers who'd filed complaints. Every story followed the same pattern: assumption, escalation, dismissal. A black businessman accused of using a stolen credit card despite showing 3 forms of ID. A Latina professor asked if she understood English after answering correctly in English. A black teenager removed from his seat because another passenger felt uncomfortable. The outcomes were equally consistent. Complaints filed, HR investigations perfunctory, resolutions always favoring the crew. Passengers offered vouchers as apology, compensation for silence. No crew members disciplined, no policies changed. Just 47 instances of Skybridge choosing convenience over justice, and Marcus's signature on the quarterly reports that showed everything was fine. His assistant knocked. "They're ready for you, sir." The elevator down to the lobby felt longer than it was. Jennifer walked with him, reviewing the questions legal predicted. Bernard had already made his objections known and been overruled. This was happening with or without lawyer approval. The lobby had been transformed. A podium with the Skybridge logo, rows of chairs filled with reporters. Cameras forming a semicircle that would capture every angle. The energy reminded Marcus of product launches, but with an edge of blood sport. They wanted contrition or defiance, tears or anger, something quotable that would define the narrative. Marcus stepped to the podium. The room quieted instantly. "My name is Marcus Bennett. I'm the founder and CEO of Skybridge Airlines. 3 days ago, I was violently removed from my own airplane because 5 employees and 1 passenger decided that a black man in a hoodie couldn't possibly belong in first class. This happened despite me showing my valid boarding pass 7 times. This happened despite me complying with every instruction. This happened because we built a system that allowed it to happen." He paused, let that settle. Saw reporters leaning forward, pens moving, cameras zooming for reaction shots. "What happened to me is not unique. In the past 3 years, Skybridge has received 47 formal complaints alleging discrimination. 47 passengers who filed official grievances saying our employees treated them differently because of race, ethnicity, religion, or appearance. Every single complaint was marked resolved. Not one resulted in discipline for crew members. Not one prompted policy changes. The room erupted, hands shooting up, voices overlapping. Marcus raised one hand. I'll take questions in a moment. First, I need you to understand what I'm announcing today. Effective immediately, Skybridge is implementing comprehensive reforms. All discrimination complaints will be reviewed by an independent board with full investigative authority and power to recommend termination. All customer-facing employees will complete mandatory quarterly bias training designed by civil rights experts. All crew members will wear body cameras. All aircraft will have cabin recording systems. Any footage will be available to passengers upon request within 72 hours. More hands, more voices. A reporter from CNN stood without being called. Mr. Bennett, these reforms will cost millions. Shareholders are already calling for your resignation. Can Skybridge afford this? Can we afford not to? I built this company because I experienced discrimination as a passenger and wanted to create something better. We failed. The cost of continuing to fail is not measured in dollars. It's measured in dignity, in trust, in the basic promise that buying a ticket means you'll be treated like a human being. Marcus looked directly into the CNN camera. If shareholders want to fire me for choosing justice over profit, that's their right, but I'm not backing down. The woman from the Washington Post, what about the employees involved? Will they face criminal charges? That's up to the FBI and the Department of Justice, who are conducting a federal civil rights investigation. I'm cooperating fully. Skybridge will not protect employees who violated passengers' rights. Fox News. Some people are saying you staged this for publicity, that you deliberately provoked the confrontation. How do you respond? Marcus felt heat rise but kept his voice level. I showed up to the airport dressed casually. That's not provocation. I showed my boarding pass when asked. That's not provocation. I sat in the seat I paid for. That's not provocation. He leaned into the microphone. The suggestion that a black man existing in first class is provocation tells you everything you need to know about why these reforms are necessary. The questions kept coming. 40 minutes of variations on the same themes: cost, accountability, whether Marcus was overreacting. He answered each one directly, refused to let them frame discrimination as a both sides issue or a PR problem instead of a civil rights violation. Finally, a young reporter from a local outlet stood. What do you say to other passengers who've experienced similar treatment but don't have the power or resources to fight back? Marcus took a breath. This one mattered. I say I'm sorry we failed you. I say your complaints mattered and should have been taken seriously the first time. I say that every passenger who files a grievance with Skybridge will now be contacted directly by our new Director of Passenger Equity and Safety, and that we're creating a compensation fund specifically for those whose complaints were previously dismissed. He paused. And I say that what happened to me should never have to happen to anyone, not because of who they are or what they've built, because dignity isn't something you earn, it's something you're born deserving. The press conference ended with a promise to provide monthly updates on reform implementation. Marcus walked off the podium to a wall of shouted follow-up questions. Jennifer running interference, Bernard looking like he'd aged 5 years in 1 hour. Back in the elevator, Marcus finally let himself lean against the wall. His temple throbbed. His hands shook slightly from adrenaline crash. Jennifer watched him with the concern of someone who'd known him long enough to see past the performance. That was either brilliant or career suicide. Maybe both. Marcus straightened as the elevator reached the executive floor. What's the stock doing? She checked her tablet. Down 11%. But social media's exploding. #DignityMatters is trending. You've got 3 million mentions in the past hour. They walked back to his office. Messages had piled up. Boeing's CEO wanted to talk, according to his assistant. So did the heads of Delta, United American. Richard Cole had sent an email marked urgent. The FAA had scheduled a follow-up meeting for next week. Marcus ignored all of it and pulled up Maya Anderson's TikTok. Her video of the press conference was already at 500,000 views, and she'd added commentary. This is what accountability looks like. Not just apologizing, actually changing the system. The comments were split, half praising Marcus, half calling him divisive or suggesting he was making it about race when it was just a misunderstanding. Marcus scrolled through, seeing the same arguments play out in miniature that he'd just faced in the press conference. People desperate to believe discrimination was rare, isolated, overblown, people insisting that following rules meant you'd be treated fairly, even when 47 passengers proved otherwise. A knock on his door, Jessica Williams carrying 3 boxes of files and wearing an expression that meant bad news hiding behind worse news. I finished the preliminary interviews. There's something you need to know. She set the boxes on his desk, pulled out a folder marked Emma Roberts, personnel file. Inside a complaint from 6 months ago, not from a passenger. From Emma herself, describing an incident where she'd been assaulted by a drunk passenger. Black male, mid-30s, became aggressive when she asked him to lower his voice. Grabbed her arm, twisted it, left bruises. She filed this with HR. They documented it, sent her to employee assistance for 3 sessions of counseling, closed the case. Jessica's voice was careful, professional, but Marcus heard the complication underneath. Every incident after that where she interacted with black male passengers, there's a pattern. Extra scrutiny, faster escalation. Daniel Carter noted it in his supervision logs but didn't intervene. Marcus read the report twice, saw the injury photos, the witness statements, the trauma that hadn't been addressed so much as managed. This doesn't excuse what she did. No, but it explains part of it. She was hurt, got minimal support, and then her fear was allowed to become policy. Jessica pulled out another file. Daniel Carter, 15 years with Skybridge, performance reviews consistently excellent until 3 years ago when he started reporting concerns about passenger complaints not being taken seriously. HR noted his concerns, marked them as addressed, continued business as usual. He tried to report the pattern. Multiple times, each time he was told the company had investigated and found no systemic issues, he eventually stopped reporting. Jessica set down a third file. Captain Bradford, decorated pilot, safety record impeccable, and a sealed HR complaint from 2019 where he'd made comments about diversity hiring being a risk to aviation safety. Marcus felt the story getting complicated in ways the press conference hadn't allowed for. Emma was a victim and a perpetrator. Daniel had tried to whistleblow and been silenced into complicity. Bradford had shown his bias years ago and been protected. None of it excused what they'd done, but all of it pointed to the same conclusion. The system had failed everyone, including the people working within it. I need to meet with them. Emma, Daniel, Bradford, one-on-one. Jessica blinked. Sir, legal advises against everything I'm doing. Set it up. Tell them it's voluntary, completely off the record, no lawyers present unless they want them. I just want to understand. She nodded, made notes, left him with the files. Marcus spent the next hour reading them completely. Emma's assault report, Daniel's escalating concerns about complaint handling, Bradford's comments about women pilots being emotional risks and minority hires being diversity checkboxes instead of qualified professionals. The picture that emerged was uglier than simple racism. It was structural failure, trauma mismanaged, bias tolerated because confronting it would require admitting the system enabled it. Emma's fear had been real. Daniel's concerns had been valid. Bradford's prejudice had been documented and dismissed. And Marcus at the top of the pyramid had signed off on quarterly reports saying everything was fine because HR said the complaints were resolved. His phone rang. Richard Cole, the chairman who'd taken his call from that holding cell. The board wants to meet. Emergency session tomorrow morning. To discuss what? Your resignation. Richard's voice carried decades of corporate smoothness. They're drafting a vote of no confidence. 3 members have already committed to supporting it. They think you're destroying shareholder value with these reforms. Marcus looked out at Seattle, the city where he'd built everything from nothing. Let them vote. Marcus, be realistic. You're majority shareholder, but the board can still make your position untenable. Fight them on this and what? They'll fire me? Let them try. I'll take the fight public, show them exactly how much destroying shareholder value costs when passengers stop flying because they don't trust your airline to treat them like human beings. Marcus kept his voice even, factual. I'm not resigning. I'm not backing down. The board can support reforms or explain to the FAA why they're protecting discrimination. Silence. Then quietly, you're betting everything on this. I already lost everything that mattered when I got dragged off my own plane. Now I'm betting on getting it back by making sure it never happens again. Marcus ended the call. The rest of the day blurred. Conference calls with operational teams about implementing body cameras. Budget meetings where CFO showed him the cost projections for quarterly bias training. Interviews with candidates for a new HR director who understood that protecting passengers meant holding employees accountable. By 6 p.m., Marcus's assistant had fielded 200 media requests, 40 investor calls, and 15 resignations from employees who objected to the reforms. Jennifer appeared with numbers showing that despite the stock drop, booking patterns hadn't changed yet. Revenue steady, passenger loads normal, operational metrics unchanged. Give it time, Marcus said. People will vote with their wallets once they understand we mean it. Or they'll vote against you for making it uncomfortable. Then we'll know who we're building this airline for. At 7, Emma Roberts arrived. She looked smaller than Marcus remembered, younger without the uniform. 26 years old, 5 years with Skybridge, and carrying the weight of being the face of a viral video that had painted her as a villain. She sat across from him in the same chair the FBI had used that morning, hands clasped in her lap. Thank you for meeting with me. Her voice was barely audible. Marcus waited. I know you probably hate me. I know I deserve it. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not checking your ticket, for assuming you were lying, for all of it. Marcus studied her, saw genuine remorse, but also something else. Fear, still present, still driving her reactions. Tell me about what happened 6 months ago, the passenger who assaulted you. Emma's hands tightened. How did you? I read your file, all of it. She looked away toward the window where Seattle's evening lights were starting to glow. He was drunk. I asked him to quiet down. He grabbed my arm, twisted it. Security removed him, but... She trailed off. I filed a complaint. HR sent me to 3 counseling sessions. Said I was cleared to return to work, but I wasn't cleared. I was still scared. Did you tell anyone you were still scared? I told Daniel, my supervisor. He said everyone gets difficult passengers, that I needed to push through it. So I did. Her voice cracked. But every time I saw a black man around that age, I got tense. Started profiling without realizing it. Started escalating situations because I was afraid they'd escalate first. Marcus let that sit between them. Understood that trauma had been left to fester. That Emma had been sent back to work without proper support. That her fear had been weaponized against passengers who'd done nothing except remind her of someone who'd hurt her. None of it excused her actions, but it explained how a 26-year-old flight attendant became part of a pattern that had harmed 47 people. You should have gotten more help, real help, not 3 sessions and a clearance note. Emma nodded, tears finally falling. I know, but I was afraid if I said I wasn't ready, they'd fire me. I need this job. I have student loans, rent, my mom's medical bills. I couldn't afford to lose it. So you came back scared and Skybridge put you back on flights where your fear could hurt passengers. Yes. Marcus leaned forward. What you did was wrong. You profiled me, refused to verify evidence, escalated to violence. That's on you. But the system that sent you back to work traumatized and alone, that's on me, on this company. We failed you, and through you, we failed everyone you interacted with afterward. Emma wiped her eyes. Are you saying you're not pressing charges? I'm saying I understand that you're a person who made terrible choices because you were operating in a system designed to protect itself instead of the people it serves, staff or passengers. Marcus picked up her personnel file. The FBI will make their own decisions about charges. I won't interfere either way, but I want you to know that if you're willing to participate in our reform process, tell your story honestly, help us understand where the training failed and the support was missing, there might be a path forward. She looked up, hope and confusion mixing. You'd let me work here again? Not in passenger-facing roles, not for a long time, maybe never. But you could help make sure other crew members get the support you didn't. Help design training that addresses trauma instead of ignoring it. Marcus set down the file. Or you can take your termination, move on, try to forget this happened, your choice. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Why would you help me? After what I did? Because revenge isn't reform. Punishing you doesn't fix the system that hurt you first. Marcus stood, walked to the window. I got dragged off my own plane. I know what it feels like to be treated as less than human. I'm not going to become the thing I'm fighting by treating you the same way. She left 20 minutes later with his card and an invitation to think about it. Marcus watched her go, feeling the complexity of justice settling over him like weight. Easy to fire everyone involved and call it accountability. Harder to ask why they'd failed and fix the reasons so the next person didn't fail the same way. Daniel Carter arrived at 8. 42 years old, 12 years with Skybridge and carrying himself like a man walking to execution. He didn't sit when Marcus gestured to the chair. I deserve to be fired. I enabled what happened by not stopping Emma when I saw the pattern developing. Marcus motioned again to the chair. This time Daniel sat. I read your supervision logs. You noted concerns about Emma's interactions with certain passengers. You flagged it to HR, and they told me she'd been cleared, that I was being oversensitive about microaggressions that were just normal customer service friction. Daniel's jaw tightened. I should have pushed harder. Why didn't you? The question hung there. Daniel stared at his hands, calculating whether honesty would help or hurt. Finally, because I'd already pushed 3 years ago when I started noticing that complaints from black passengers were being handled differently. I filed reports, requested training updates, asked for policy reviews. He looked up. HR told me I was creating problems where none existed. My performance review that year noted that I needed to focus on operational efficiency instead of pursuing peripheral social issues. Marcus pulled up Daniel's file on his tablet, found the review. Read the exact words. Employee demonstrates concerning tendency to overanalyze routine passenger interactions through lens of discrimination rather than accepting standard resolution protocols. They told you to stop paying attention. And I did, because I have a mortgage and a kid in college and another heading there next year. Because Skybridge was a good company, better than most, and I convinced myself that if HR said the complaints were being handled, they were being handled. Daniel's voice went rough. I convinced myself that keeping my job mattered more than keeping passengers safe. And now a man I should have protected got bloodied and arrested because I chose comfort over courage. Marcus recognized that tone, the same one he'd heard in his own head when he read those 47 complaint files and realized his signature was on reports that had minimized them. Complicity through convenience, wrapped in the lie that someone else was handling the hard parts. What would you have done differently if you could go back? I would have documented everything myself. Gone over HR's head, contacted the FAA directly if I had to. Daniel met his eyes. I would have risked my job to protect passengers. That's what we're supposed to do. That's what I failed to do. Marcus considered him, saw genuine remorse, saw someone who'd tried and been shut down and chose silence over sacrifice. Understood it because he'd done the same thing by accepting HR's assurances that resolved meant fixed. The reforms I'm implementing include a whistleblower protection program, anonymous reporting channels that bypass HR and go directly to an independent board, financial incentives for employees who identify problems before they become patterns. Marcus pulled up the draft policy. I need someone to run it, someone who knows what it's like to see problems and be told to ignore them, someone who won't make that mistake again. Daniel's expression shifted. You're offering me a job? After what I did? I'm offering you a chance to fix what you helped break. It doesn't erase what happened, but it might prevent the next time. Marcus slid a folder across the desk. Director of Employee Integrity. You'll report directly to me. Your job is to make sure that when crew members see something wrong, they have the power and protection to speak up. That when passengers file complaints, someone investigates for real. Daniel opened the folder, scanned the job description. This will make me unpopular. With crew, with management, with anyone who wants things to stay comfortable. Yes. I'll be questioning every decision, every complaint resolution, every time someone says a problem doesn't exist. That's the job. Daniel closed the folder, set it down carefully. Can I think about it? Take 48 hours, but understand that if you say no, someone else gets the role and you're still terminated. This is the only path back. After Daniel left, Marcus sat in the quiet of his office, feeling the moral calculus of what he was building. Emma and Daniel weren't monsters. They were people who'd operated in a broken system and made choices that hurt others. Firing them would feel satisfying, clean, decisive, but it wouldn't fix the system that created them. The final meeting was scheduled for 9. Captain Thomas Bradford, 58 years old, 30 years in aviation, and according to his personnel file, a documented history of bias that Skybridge had noted and ignored. He arrived in civilian clothes, no uniform, no captain's authority, just an aging pilot who'd refused to check a manifest because he'd already decided what truth looked like. He didn't offer apologies or explanations, just sat down and waited. Marcus pulled up Bradford's 2019 complaint. Read aloud. Captain Bradford expressed concerns that diversity hiring initiatives were compromising aviation safety by prioritizing demographics over qualifications. Bradford's face stayed neutral. I stand by that assessment. Do you stand by refusing to verify my boarding pass because you assumed a black man in a hoodie couldn't be CEO? I made a judgment call based on years of experience reading situations. Marcus felt his patience thinning. Your experience told you that Victoria Hayes, who wasn't even on the right flight, belonged in my seat more than I did. I trusted my crew's assessment. Your crew never checked the manifest, neither did you. Marcus leaned back. You had 4 different pieces of evidence that I was telling the truth. My boarding pass, which I showed 7 times. The seat reservation system, which you could have checked with 1 radio call. My employee badge, which I offered to show. And basic logic that suggests someone wouldn't refuse to leave a seat they'd stolen. He paused. You ignored all of it because you saw what you expected to see, a black man causing problems. Bradford's jaw worked. I've flown 2 million miles without incident. I've never been accused of discrimination. You were accused in 2019. HR documented it and did nothing. Marcus pulled up the complaint on his screen, turned it so Bradford could see. A black first officer reported that you questioned her qualifications, asked if she'd been a diversity hire, made comments about women being too emotional for cockpit stress. She filed a formal grievance. Know what happened? HR gave you a written warning that went in your file and never affected your career. For the first time, Bradford's composure cracked. That complaint was overblown. I asked legitimate questions about her training. You asked if she got the job because of quotas. That's not a legitimate question, that's bias. Marcus closed the file. And Skybridge protected you. Let you keep flying. Let you keep making decisions about who belonged and who didn't. Until 3 days ago, when your decisions ended with a CEO getting arrested on his own aircraft. Silence stretched. Bradford stared at the desk between them. I'm not offering you a path back, Marcus said finally. No reform program, no second chance. You're terminated with cause. Your pension is under review. The FAA will decide whether your pilot's license should be revoked. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand why. Bradford looked up, angry now, defensive. Because I made one mistake? Because you made 30 years of mistakes and nobody stopped you. Because you created a culture where crew members learned that assumptions mattered more than evidence. Because you stood in my aircraft and told me I didn't belong in a company I built. Marcus stood. You don't get to pretend this was one bad day. This was who you've always been. Skybridge just finally stopped protecting you. Bradford left without another word. Marcus watched him go, felt none of the satisfaction he'd expected. Just exhaustion, and the knowledge that firing Bradford didn't undo the 30 years he'd been allowed to carry his bias into cockpits and cabins. The office was dark when Marcus finally looked up from his computer. Past midnight, building mostly empty, just security and the cleaning crew making rounds. He'd spent the last 3 hours reviewing implementation timelines for the reforms, calculating costs, running scenarios where shareholders revolted or regulators intervened or passengers decided that addressing discrimination was more trouble than it was worth. The numbers looked brutal. $50 million in first-year costs, quarterly training for 8,000 employees, body cameras and recording systems for 200 aircraft, independent oversight board with full investigative authority. All of it necessary, all of it expensive, all of it making him a target for anyone who thought profit mattered more than principles. His phone buzzed. Text from Jennifer. Board meeting confirmed for 8 a.m. tomorrow. They have the votes to force you out. Please reconsider. Marcus typed back. Not reconsidering. See you at 8. Another text, this one from Jessica. Finished all 47 interviews. Patterns are worse than we thought. Some complaints were altered before filing. Need to talk ASAP. Marcus called her. She answered on the first ring, sounding wired despite the late hour. 3 of the complaints were edited after passengers signed them. Changed wording to make incidents sound less severe. I compared the original signed copies to what went into the system. Someone in HR was softening them. Who? Sarah Montgomery, the HR director you fired. Jessica's voice went tight. She's been doing it for at least 2 years, making complaints look like misunderstandings instead of discrimination. I have emails where she instructed staff to use phrases like cultural difference and communication gap instead of racial profiling. Marcus absorbed that. Sarah Montgomery, who he'd fired via email and stripped of severance, had been actively covering up discrimination for years. Send everything to the FBI and the DOJ. And Jessica, thank you for the email in February. For having the courage to risk your job when nobody else would. I almost didn't send it. I was scared you wouldn't believe me. I believe you. And I'm making sure that fear you felt, that calculation about whether speaking up was worth the risk becomes impossible. New employees won't have to be brave. They'll have a system that protects them. After hanging up, Marcus pulled up the email he'd ignored in February. Read Jessica's careful wording. Her anonymous sender address, her plea that someone investigate before the pattern got worse. He'd forwarded it to HR with instructions to look into it. HR, run by Sarah Montgomery, had responded that they'd investigated and found no systemic issues, the same Sarah Montgomery who'd been altering complaints. Marcus felt the scope of the failure crystallizing, not just individual bias, Not just inadequate training, but active suppression, deliberate minimization, structural protection of discrimination at the expense of the people it hurt, and he'd enabled it by trusting the system to police itself. His computer screen showed an email draft he'd started and abandoned 3 times. To all passengers who filed discrimination complaints. 2021 to 2024. Subject: I'm sorry we failed you. He finished it now. 200 words acknowledging that their complaints had been dismissed, minimized, or altered. That Skybridge had chosen institutional comfort over individual justice. That he was personally responsible for creating a company that claimed to value dignity while building systems that violated it. He attached the compensation fund details, the independent review board contact information, his direct email for anyone who wanted to tell him personally what his company had done to them. Before sending, he added one more line. Your voice mattered then and it matters now. Thank you for having the courage to speak up when we had the cowardice to look away. He hit send, watched the email disappear into the system, knowing it would trigger more lawsuits, more media coverage, more evidence that Skybridge had been failing passengers systematically while reporting everything as resumed. His phone rang. Unknown number, but Marcus answered anyway. Late-night calls were either crisis or opportunity, and at this point he welcomed both. Mr. Bennett, this is Dr. James Robinson. I received your email. The surgeon, first victim on Jessica's list. Marcus straightened. Dr. Robinson, thank you for calling. I want you to know that when I filed my complaint 3 years ago, I didn't expect anything to change. I've been Black in America long enough to know that complaints go into files and files go into drawers and drawers stay closed. His voice carried the weight of experience. But you opened the drawer. You're actually doing something. I want to help. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. How? I'm a cardiovascular surgeon. I teach at UW Medicine. I have credibility, platform, expertise. Let me be the face of what happened. Let me tell my story publicly so people understand this isn't about one CEO's bad day. This is about every passenger who's been judged before they opened their mouth. Dr. Robinson, that will make you a target. People will question your motives, your memory, my blackness. Yes, they will. Just like they questioned it when I was accused of stealing a blanket worth $12 while wearing a watch worth $12,000. He paused. I'm 62 years old. I've spent my career saving lives while people assumed I was the janitor. I'm done being quiet about it. They talked for 40 minutes. Dr. Robinson agreed to join the independent review board to be interviewed for the reform's implementation, to serve as medical advisor on passenger care standards. By the time they hung up, Marcus had the first piece of a coalition he hadn't known he was building. People who'd been hurt by the system and were willing to help fix it instead of just walking away. The texts and emails continued through the night. Reverend Michael Brown offering to lead bias training workshops. Professor David Harris volunteering to design curriculum. 3 more victims from Jessica's list reaching out with stories and offers to help. By dawn, Marcus had 15 people committed to reform. 15 passengers who could have sued and settled and disappeared but chose instead to build something better from the wreckage of what had failed them. The board meeting started at 8. Marcus walked in carrying evidence of what Skybridge had been and a plan for what it needed to become. Faced 12 people who'd built their wealth on his company and now wanted him gone for threatening it. Richard Cole called the meeting to order, presented the vote of no confidence. Listed grievances, unauthorized policy changes, excessive financial commitments, damaging public statements, failure to prioritize shareholder value. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Richard finished, he stood. I'm not resigning. I'm not backing down. And if you vote me out, I will make it my mission to ensure every passenger, every employee, and every regulatory body knows exactly why. He pulled up Jessica's report on the screen. 47 complaints buried, Evidence altered. Discrimination protected. All of it happening while you sat in these chairs and approved quarterly reports saying everything was fine. The room went silent. Marcus continued. You can fire me, but you can't fire the truth. And the truth is that Skybridge built its success on the backs of passengers we failed and employees we silenced. I'm offering you a choice. Help me fix it or explain to federal investigators why you preferred profit over civil rights. The vote was called, 7-5. Marcus kept his seat, not because they believed in reform, because they feared exposure more than they valued his removal. Marcus accepted the victory without celebration, understood it was temporary, conditional, revocable the moment convenience outweighed fear. But temporary was enough time to implement the reforms, enough time to prove that accountability and profit could coexist, enough time to make sure that the next passenger who showed their boarding pass 7 times would be believed the first time. 6 months after the board meeting, Marcus stood in a federal courtroom watching Captain Thomas Bradford being led away in handcuffs. 18 months in federal prison, pilot's license permanently revoked, $250,000 fine. The judge had been clear. Discriminatory conduct that resulted in civil rights violations carried consequences that transcended employment. Bradford's attorney filed notice of appeal immediately, but the bailiff still led him through the side door toward processing. Emma Roberts received 12 months and 2 years supervised probation. Daniel Carter got 15 months based on his supervisory role. Officer Derek Wilson, 6 months for excessive force, terminated from airport security effective immediately. Victoria Hayes faced only civil judgment. $2.1 million in damages for assault, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Her bankruptcy filing was already public record. Marcus testified at each trial, walked through the microaggressions and escalation, showed the jury his temple scar and the medical records documenting concussion. Described the handcuffs cutting circulation, the taste of copper when his head struck metal, the 100 phones recording while he fought to maintain dignity. The defense attorneys tried variations of the same strategy, suggesting Marcus had been confrontational, had refused reasonable requests, had played the race card to manufacture grievance. The juries hadn't bought it. Video evidence was unambiguous. 12 people watching footage of a man showing his boarding pass 7 times while being called a liar, then being violently removed despite never raising his voice or his hands. 12 people understanding that compliance hadn't protected him because protection was never the point. Nicole Patterson, the assistant attorney general who'd interviewed Marcus 6 months ago, approached as the courtroom emptied. She carried a briefcase Marcus recognized from that first meeting, same yellow legal pad visible inside. 5 convictions, complete accountability. You should feel vindicated. Marcus watched Bradford disappear through the security door. I feel tired. The FAA's final report comes out next week. Preliminary findings show Skybridge wasn't an isolated case. They found similar patterns at 7 other airlines. Your reforms are becoming industry standard. Because they're being forced to, not because they believe in them. Nicole's expression softened slightly. Does the motivation matter if the outcome protects passengers? Marcus considered that. 6 months of implementation had shown him the resistance firsthand. Pilots complaining that body cameras created an adversarial environment. Flight attendants pushing back on quarterly bias training as corporate overreach. Gate agents protesting that verification requirements slowed boarding. All of them learning the same lesson he'd taught Bradford. Discomfort wasn't discrimination, and being held accountable felt threatening only to people who'd gotten comfortable avoiding it. The outcome matters, but sustainable change requires belief, not just compliance. Marcus picked up his briefcase. Thank you for prosecuting these cases. I know there was pressure to settle quietly. There was, but 47 victims deserve to see their complaints taken seriously. Nicole extended her hand. The Civil Rights Division is creating a new airline discrimination task force. We'd like your input on investigative protocols. They shook. Marcus left the courthouse through the side exit, avoiding cameras he knew waited at the front. 6 months of trials meant 6 months of media coverage. His face attached to every story about discrimination and accountability and the cost of reform. Some outlets praised him. Others suggested he was race-baiting, that he'd orchestrated the incident for attention, that the real victims were the employees whose careers he'd destroyed. The latter narrative had gained traction in certain circles. Conservative media ran segments about cancel culture and due process. Online forums dissected his testimony, looking for inconsistencies or exaggerations. Someone had started a GoFundMe for Bradford's legal defense that raised $40,000 before the platform shut it down for violating terms of service. Marcus understood that for every person who saw justice in those convictions, someone else saw persecution. Understood that changing systems meant threatening the people who'd benefited from them, and threatened people fought back with everything they had. His car service waited at the curb. Jennifer had sent updates throughout the trial. Stock had recovered to pre-incident levels. Operational metrics remained strong. Passenger complaints were down 63% industry-wide since the reforms. The numbers said Skybridge was succeeding, but numbers didn't capture the cost of the past 6 months. 300 employees had resigned rather than comply with new training requirements. 74 had been terminated after failing to meet bias prevention standards during quarterly reviews. Independent investigations into the 47 buried complaints had resulted in 18 additional firings, including 3 regional managers who'd helped Sarah Montgomery alter documentation. Sarah herself was awaiting trial on obstruction of justice charges. Her lawyer had offered to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentencing, providing emails and memos that showed the complaint suppression had been policy, not accident. Board members named in those communications had resigned or been forced out. Richard Cole remained as chairman, but with reduced authority, his credibility damaged by evidence. He'd been warned about discrimination patterns and chosen profit over action. The corporate bloodletting had been necessary but brutal. Marcus had built Skybridge over 15 years, and in 6 months he'd dismantled half its leadership structure to cut out the rot. The company that emerged was cleaner but smaller, humbler, forced to acknowledge that good intentions meant nothing without rigorous enforcement. The drive to Skybridge headquarters took 30 minutes through DC traffic. Marcus used the time to review Jessica's latest report on implementation progress. The Dignity Initiative had processed 800 new complaints in 6 months, investigated each one independently, resolved them with transparency that sometimes meant admitting fault and compensating passengers. The compensation fund had paid out $12 million to victims of previous discrimination, with more cases pending. Dr. James Robinson's Medical Oversight Board had redesigned passenger care standards, prioritizing dignity alongside safety. Reverend Michael Brown's training workshops had reached 6,000 employees across the industry, forcing uncomfortable conversations about unconscious bias and structural racism. Professor David Harris had created curriculum now being taught at 3 aviation schools, ensuring the next generation of airline professionals understood that diversity wasn't a quota but a requirement for serving diverse passengers. The reforms were working. But working didn't mean easy. Marcus's assistant met him in the lobby with messages marked urgent. Boeing wanted to reschedule the contract discussion, $300 million still on the table contingent on Skybridge demonstrating sustained reform. Delta's CEO had requested a meeting to discuss collaborative bias training. The FAA needed Marcus's testimony for congressional hearings scheduled next month. And there was one more message, flagged personal. Maya Anderson requesting interview for documentary she was producing about systemic discrimination in aviation. Marcus remembered her live stream, the teenager who'd had the courage to document injustice while adults looked away. Tell Maya yes, whatever she needs. He took the elevator to the executive floor, now half empty after the resignations and terminations. The energy felt different, quieter, less certain. People who remained understood they were part of an experiment. Whether a company could prioritize justice and remain profitable, whether accountability could coexist with success. Jennifer waited in his office with quarterly results. Revenue down 8% year-over-year, but passenger satisfaction up 32%. Market share slightly reduced, but customer loyalty metrics showing significant improvement. The company was smaller but stronger, leaner but more trusted. We're projected to break even on reform costs within 18 months if current trends hold. Jennifer pulled up projections. But there's resistance brewing. Pilots' union is threatening action over body camera policies. They're claiming it violates privacy rights. Marcus had expected this. Schedule a meeting with union leadership. I'll address their concerns directly. They're demanding you remove the body camera requirement as condition for negotiation. Then we don't negotiate. Body cameras stay. Marcus pulled up the data showing how recording systems had already prevented 3 potential incidents by making crew members aware their actions were documented. Privacy doesn't include the right to discriminate without evidence. Jennifer made notes, but her expression stayed troubled. There's something else. We've had pushback from some passengers. Complaints that the bias training is making flights uncomfortable, that crew members are being too careful, overcompensating. Marcus felt the familiar frustration. Fix discrimination and get accused of overcorrection. Ignore it and get accused of complicity. The middle ground kept shifting based on who felt inconvenienced. What kind of complaints? White passengers saying they're being treated with suspicion, claiming reverse discrimination because crew members are questioning them more than minorities now. Jennifer pulled up specific examples. Most seem like people uncomfortable with losing unearned advantage, but a few might be legitimate overcorrection. Marcus read through the complaints, saw the pattern Jennifer had identified. People who'd never been questioned before now facing the same scrutiny black passengers had always endured, calling it discrimination instead of recognizing it as equality. But there were 2 cases where crew members seemed to have swung too far the other direction, treating white passengers with excessive suspicion to avoid appearing biased. Add these to the quarterly training review. We're not trying to replace one form of profiling with another. We're trying to eliminate profiling entirely. Marcus forwarded the cases to the oversight board. And make sure these passengers know their complaints are being taken seriously. Same process as everyone else. The rest of the afternoon dissolved into meetings about implementation challenges and operational adjustments. By 6 p.m., Marcus's temple ached where the scar tissue pulled when he concentrated too long. The stitches had come out months ago, but the nerve damage remained. A permanent reminder that justice had physical costs. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Robinson. Emma Roberts wants to speak with you. Says she has something important to discuss. Should I arrange it? Marcus hesitated. Emma had completed her sentence, was 3 months into supervised probation, working as a consultant for the bias training program while banned from passenger-facing roles. Their last conversation had been in this office 6 months ago when he'd offered her a path to redemption through reform participation. She'd taken it, become one of the program's most effective voices because she could speak from experience about how trauma and inadequate support had turned her into someone who harmed others. He texted back, set it up for tomorrow. My office, 10 a.m. That evening, Marcus flew commercial for the first time since the incident. Not Skybridge. He'd made a point of flying other airlines to see how industry-wide reforms were being implemented. Tonight it was Delta, Seattle to Atlanta, Seat 2A reserved under a pseudonym his assistant had arranged. Check-in was smooth. The agent verified his ID and boarding pass without extra scrutiny. Processed him in 90 seconds, same as the passengers ahead. TSA screening was random but professional. No invasive pat-downs or assumptions. Gate agent scanned his pass once, smiled, welcomed him aboard. The difference was startling. 6 months ago, this wouldn't have happened. Not because Delta was better, but because nobody was being held accountable. Now, with FAA oversight and federal task force investigations and the knowledge that discrimination could mean criminal charges, every airline had tightened protocols. Marcus settled into 2A, the seat that had become symbolic of everything he'd fought for. A white woman in her 40s was assigned 2B, arrived carrying expensive luggage and platinum status credentials. She glanced at Marcus, looked at her boarding pass, looked at him again. For a moment, Marcus felt his body tense, muscle memory preparing for confrontation. But the woman just smiled politely and stowed her bag. No questions, no assumptions, no suggestion he might be in the wrong seat. The flight attendant, a young black man who introduced himself as Christopher, welcomed them both by name and asked if they needed anything. Professional, courteous, treating them equally because equality was now policy with teeth behind it. Marcus relaxed slowly, let himself experience what flying should always have been. Unremarkable, boring, focused on getting from point A to point B without being forced to prove you deserved to be treated like a person. Halfway through the flight, the woman in 2B turned to him. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Bennett?" Here it came. Recognition, opinion, judgment. Marcus nodded. "I wanted to thank you. I'm a pediatrician. I travel for conferences frequently. I've seen how I get treated differently than my black colleagues. Easier check-in, less scrutiny, benefit of doubt when there's confusion. It always bothered me, but I didn't know how to address it." She extended her hand. "What you did, forcing the industry to change, it matters. Not just for people who face discrimination. For all of us who benefit from it and want that to stop." They shook. Marcus felt something shift, a reminder that allies existed beyond the courtroom and the boardroom, that some people recognized unearned advantage and chose to challenge it rather than defend it. The flight landed on time. Marcus deplaned without incident, collected his bag, caught a car to his hotel, ordinary, unremarkable, exactly as it should be. The next morning, Emma Roberts arrived at his office wearing business casual instead of a uniform, carrying herself with the careful dignity of someone rebuilding from ruins. She sat across from Marcus and didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I want to tell you what happened after the assault. The real story, not what made it into my personnel file." Marcus waited. "The passenger who grabbed me was drunk, aggressive. Security removed him and I filed a complaint. HR sent me to 3 counseling sessions with a therapist who specialized in workplace stress. She asked how I was sleeping, whether I was having nightmares, if I felt safe returning to work." Emma's hands clasped together. "I told her no. I told her I was terrified every time I saw someone who looked like him. She documented it, said I needed at least 6 more sessions before being cleared for passenger interaction. But you only got 3. HR overruled her, said the company couldn't afford to have me out that long, that the therapist was being overcautious. They cleared me for duty and told me to be strong, that everyone deals with difficult passengers." Emma looked up. "I should have quit, should have refused to go back, but I was 24, drowning in debt, desperate to keep my job. So I went back scared, and Skybridge put me in situations where my fear could weaponize against innocent people." Marcus felt anger rising, not at Emma, but at the system that had failed her first and through her had failed everyone she'd encountered afterward. "Did you tell anyone at HR that you weren't ready?" "I tried. My supervisor, Daniel, he listened, said he'd advocate for extended leave, but HR told him the same thing they told me. The therapist was overreacting. I was fit for duty. If I couldn't handle normal passenger interactions, maybe this wasn't the right career." Emma's voice went brittle. "So I stayed, and I profiled, and I escalated, and I became the thing I was afraid of. Someone who hurt people because I was operating from a place of unhealed trauma." Marcus understood what she was offering. Context that didn't excuse but explained. Evidence that the system's failures were deeper than just buried complaints. Emma had been both victim and perpetrator, and the company that should have protected her had instead weaponized her trauma. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm testifying at Sarah Montgomery's trial next week. Her lawyer is going to argue that she was just following policy, that the company created the culture of minimizing complaints and she was a scapegoat. I want you to know the truth before it comes out publicly. Emma pulled out a folder, handed it to Marcus. These are my therapy notes from those 3 sessions. The therapist documented everything I told her, including that I wasn't ready to return. HR has copies of this. They knew I was still traumatized and they sent me back anyway. Marcus opened the folder, read the clinical notes, saw the therapist's clear recommendation for extended treatment, her assessment that Emma posed a risk to herself and passengers if returned to duty prematurely. Saw HR's response. Patient cleared for return to work effective immediately. Further treatment optional and at employee's expense. They chose operational convenience over your well-being and over passenger safety. Yes, and I let them because I was scared of losing my job more than I was scared of hurting someone. Emma's composure finally cracked. I know that doesn't excuse what I did to you. I know I profiled you, refused to see evidence, participated in your assault. I own that. But I want people to understand that this wasn't just individual prejudice. This was institutional failure at every level. Marcus closed the folder, looked at this young woman who'd made terrible choices within a system designed to produce terrible outcomes. Understood that justice required holding both accountable, the individuals who'd failed and the structures that had enabled their failure. I'll make sure the prosecutors have this. And Emma, thank you for having the courage to tell the truth even when it's complicated. She left with her folder and her burden slightly lighter. Marcus spent the next hour on the phone with Nicole Patterson, walking through Emma's testimony and the implications for Sarah Montgomery's trial. The evidence showed that HR hadn't just buried complaints. They'd actively prevented interventions that could have stopped discrimination before it started. Sarah's trial was scheduled for the following week. Marcus would be there, sitting in the gallery watching the woman who'd spent years protecting institutional comfort at the expense of individual dignity face consequences for choices that had seemed small in the moment but had accumulated into systemic harm. That afternoon, Maya Anderson arrived for her interview. She was 17 now, preparing for college applications, had spent the past 6 months developing her documentary about aviation discrimination. She set up a camera on a tripod, professional equipment her viral video success had helped fund, and approached the interview with the seriousness of someone who understood she was documenting history. Mr. Bennett, when you got on that plane 6 months ago, did you expect what happened? Marcus thought about his answer. I expected microaggressions. I expected extra scrutiny. I expected to be seen as suspicious or out of place. I didn't expect violence. But I should have, because for a lot of black people, compliance doesn't guarantee safety. It just gives the system less excuse when they hurt you anyway. Maya adjusted her camera angle. Why did you decide to test your own airline? Because I'd been reading complaint files that HR marked resolved, and something felt wrong. The language was too smooth, too corporate, too focused on closing cases instead of fixing problems. I wanted to see if the system I'd built actually worked, or if it just looked like it worked for people who never had to test it. And what did you learn? Marcus met her eyes, this teenager who documented his humiliation with steady hands and clear purpose. I learned that good intentions are worthless without accountability, that claiming to value dignity while building systems that violate it makes you complicit, that I'd spent 15 years telling myself Skybridge was different when it was just better at hiding the same problems everyone else had. The interview continued for 2 hours. Maya asked about the trials, the reforms, the resistance from employees and passengers who felt threatened by accountability. She asked about the personal cost, The death threats, the harassment, the conservative media calling him divisive and opportunistic. She asked if he'd do it again, knowing what he knew now. Yes, because silence is complicity and complicity is surrender. If I'd stayed quiet, taken the settlement, made this go away, nothing would change. 47 victims would stay dismissed. Hundreds of future passengers would face the same discrimination. The system would learn that it could keep failing as long as it failed quietly. Maya turned off her camera. My dad said what you did was the most important act of leadership he's seen in his career. He's a professor, teaches ethics and social justice. He said most people with power use it to protect themselves. You used yours to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Marcus felt the weight of that, understood that leadership meant accepting cost without guarantee of reward, meant doing what was right even when it threatened everything you'd built. Tell your dad I appreciate that. And Maya, thank you for filming, for having the courage to document injustice when adults were looking away. Your video is the reason we couldn't hide from this. She smiled, packed up her equipment. I'm applying to journalism schools. I want to keep telling stories that matter, stories that force people to see what they'd rather ignore. After she left, Marcus returned to the windows overlooking Seattle, the city he'd claimed as his own 15 years ago when he was young and ambitious and convinced that success would protect him from the discrimination he'd faced as a broke college student. He'd been wrong. Success had just given him the resources to fight back when discrimination found him anyway. His phone buzzed. Text from Jennifer. Sarah Montgomery found guilty on all counts. Sentencing in 30 days. Marcus absorbed that. Sarah had orchestrated complaint suppression for years, altered documentation, created policies that prioritized institutional image over passenger dignity. Her conviction meant acknowledgement that the cover-up had been criminal, that protecting discrimination was a crime even when nobody got physically hurt. Another text from Bernard, his lawyer. Boeing confirmed, contract signing next week, $300 million back on the table. The contract he'd been flying to sign 6 months ago, the deal that had evaporated when video of his arrest went viral. Boeing had been clear they couldn't partner with an airline facing discrimination scandals. But 6 months of reform, 5 criminal convictions, industry-wide policy changes, and sustained commitment to accountability had convinced them Skybridge was serious about transformation. Marcus called Jennifer. Schedule the Boeing signing for next Friday. Public event, full media access. I want people to see that doing the right thing doesn't destroy business, it builds trust. The optics will be powerful. CEO who got arrested on his own plane now signing the biggest contract in company history. The optics are that accountability and success can coexist, that you don't have to choose between justice and profit. Marcus pulled up the quarterly projections showing revenue recovering. We lost 8% market share confronting discrimination. We'll gain it back by being the airline passengers' trust to treat them with dignity. The week dissolved into preparation. Contract negotiations, media strategy, coordination with Boeing's publicity team. Marcus reviewed every clause personally, insisted on including diversity requirements in the partnership agreement. Joint bias training, shared oversight protocols, mutual accountability for discrimination complaints. Boeing agreed. Their CEO had been watching Skybridge's transformation, recognized that the aviation industry's future depended on serving increasingly diverse passengers who wouldn't tolerate being treated as threats or anomalies. Friday arrived with Seattle sunshine and a crowd gathering outside Skybridge headquarters. Media, employees, passengers who'd been part of the 47 complaints and had come to witness the company's evolution. Dr. Robinson was there, representing the oversight board. Reverend Brown, leading a prayer before the ceremony. Professor Harris documenting the event for his curriculum on corporate accountability. Marcus stood at the podium with Boeing's CEO beside him, cameras capturing the moment. The contract was $300 million over 5 years, partnership on sustainable aviation technology, commitment to building the future of flight together. But before signing, Marcus addressed the crowd. 6 months ago, I was arrested on my own airplane because 5 people decided I looked like someone who didn't belong. That moment could have ended my career, destroyed this company, reinforced the idea that discrimination was inevitable and accountability was impossible. He paused. Let them feel the alternative timeline. Instead, we chose transparency over silence. We chose reform over reputation. We chose to acknowledge that we'd failed passengers systematically and needed to rebuild from the foundation up. Marcus pulled out the quarterly report showing complaints down, satisfaction up, trust recovering. These numbers don't erase what happened. They don't undo the harm we caused, but they prove that companies can change when they commit to it. That accountability doesn't destroy business. It builds better business. He picked up the pen, signed his name on the contract. Boeing's CEO signed next. Flashbulbs captured the moment, the handshake, the symbolic restoration of partnership built on mutual commitment to dignity. After the ceremony, Marcus walked through the crowd, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. Met passengers who'd been part of the 47 complaints. Thanked them for having the courage to speak up when the system was designed to silence them. Met employees who'd stayed through the reforms, who'd embraced the discomfort of examining their own biases instead of defending them. He found Jessica near the back, watching everything with quiet satisfaction. She'd been promoted twice in 6 months, now Senior Vice President of Passenger Equity, reporting directly to Marcus with authority to investigate any complaint regardless of who it implicated. "You did this," Marcus told her. "That email you sent in February started everything." Jessica shook her head. "You did this by taking the email seriously instead of forwarding it to HR and forgetting about it. Most CEOs would have buried it deeper. Most CEOs haven't been dragged off their own plane. Perspective matters." That evening, Marcus returned to the airport for another test flight. Same route as 6 months ago. Seattle to DC, seat 2A, dressed casually to see if the reforms held when nobody knew he was watching. Check-in was professional. TSA was efficient. Gate agent verified his pass once and welcomed him aboard. He settled into 2A on a Skybridge flight this time, watching his own crew implement the protocols he'd fought for. The flight attendant working first class was new. Young woman named Andrea who'd completed bias training 3 times in 6 months as part of the enhanced program. She welcomed Marcus by name, asked about preferences without assumption, treated him exactly like every other passenger. Halfway through the flight, a white man in 3C tried to move to an empty seat in first class without authorization. Andrea approached him professionally, explained the policy, offered to help him upgrade properly through the system. The man became agitated, insisted he was a frequent flyer who should be accommodated. Andrea stayed calm, repeated the policy, called her supervisor when the passenger continued arguing. Marcus watched the interaction, saw the body camera recording everything, saw Andrea following protocol without profiling or assuming threat. The supervisor, an older black woman named Patricia, resolved the situation by offering the passenger a complimentary upgrade on his next flight while explaining that company policy required proper authorization. The passenger accepted, returned to his assigned seat, and the flight continued without incident. After landing, Marcus approached Andrea. "That was well handled. The passenger in 3C. She smiled, professional. "Thank you. The new protocols make these situations clearer. I know exactly what to do and that my actions are documented if there's a complaint." "Has the body camera felt intrusive?" Andrea considered the question. "At first, yes, but honestly, it's made me better at my job. Knowing everything's recorded makes me more careful, more fair. I can't take shortcuts or make assumptions. I have to treat everyone equally because the camera doesn't care about my feelings, just my actions." Marcus thanked her, deplaned, collected his luggage. The trip had been ordinary, unremarkable, exactly what he'd fought 6 months for. A world where flying meant getting from origin to destination without being forced to prove your humanity along the way. 2 weeks later, he returned to the same route one final time. Not to test, but to close the circle. This trip included a young black teenager named Jamal, 17 years old, heading to Georgetown for a scholarship interview. First time flying first class, nervous about whether he belonged there. Marcus had arranged the ticket personally after Jamal's guidance counselor reached out. The kid was brilliant, came from nothing, had worked 3 jobs to help his single mother make rent while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. Exactly the kind of student Georgetown wanted. Exactly the kind of passenger who shouldn't have to worry about being profiled before his interview. They met at the gate. Jamal recognized Marcus from news coverage, eyes going wide. "Mr. Bennett, I can't believe, thank you for the ticket, sir. I'll pay you back." Marcus raised a hand. "No payback needed. Just focus on your interview. You earned this opportunity." They boarded together. Marcus had reserved 2A as always, but he watched Jamal's nervousness increase as they approached first class. Saw the teenager's hand tighten on his boarding pass, saw him preparing for challenge or dismissal. The flight attendant, Christopher from Marcus's earlier Delta flight who'd since joined Skybridge, welcomed them both warmly. Verified their tickets without extra scrutiny, helped Jamal stow his bag, treated him with the same respect he'd give any passenger. Marcus waited until they were airborne, then turned to Jamal. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified. Not of flying, of the interview, of messing up this chance." Marcus understood that fear, had felt it 20 years ago on his way to Boeing, before discrimination derailed the opportunity. "You're going to do great, but I want to give you something." He pulled out a business card, wrote his personal cell number on the back. "If anyone at Georgetown or anywhere else questions whether you belong, you call me. Immediately. Don't let them make you doubt yourself." Jamal took the card, held it like a talisman. "Why are you helping me?" "Because 20 years ago I was you. Smart, broke, heading to an interview that could change everything. I didn't make it. Someone decided I didn't belong and I lost the opportunity." Marcus met the teenager's eyes. "I built Skybridge so that wouldn't happen to other people. This is me making sure it doesn't happen to you." They talked for the rest of the flight. Marcus learned about Jamal's mother who cleaned offices at night to support them. About his dream of becoming a civil rights attorney, about his fear that no matter how hard he worked, his skin color would always be seen first. "It will be," Marcus said honestly. "People will see you're black before they see you're brilliant. They'll make assumptions before you open your mouth. But here's what I learned. You can't control what people assume. You can only control how you respond. Stay calm, stay strategic, stay focused on your goals. And when the system fails you, because sometimes it will, you fight back. Not with anger, with evidence, persistence, and the refusal to accept that discrimination is inevitable." The plane landed at Reagan National. Marcus walked Jamal to baggage claim, made sure he had transportation to Georgetown, watched the teenager disappear into a cab with his scholarship folder and Marcus's business card. Standing in the terminal, Marcus felt the weight of the past 6 months settling into something like peace. Not satisfaction. Too many people had been hurt for that. Not vindication. Justice delayed was still justice compromised. But peace in knowing that he'd taken the worst moment of his professional life and transformed it into systematic change that would outlast him. His phone buzzed, text from Maya. Documentary accepted to Sundance. Title, The Seat of Power, How One CEO Transformed an Industry. Premiere in January. Can you attend? Marcus typed back. I'll be there. Another text, this one from Bernard. Shareholder meeting next week. They're voting on making the Dignity Initiative permanent policy written into company charter. Looks like it'll pass unanimously. Unanimous. Even the board members who'd tried to force him out 6 months ago now recognized that accountability was good business, that passengers chose airlines they trusted, that employees perform better in transparent systems, that doing the right thing and doing the profitable thing could align if you had the courage to prioritize both. Marcus caught a car back to his hotel, used the drive to review emails from the 47 passengers whose complaints had triggered everything. 32 had accepted positions on the oversight board or advisory committees. 15 had taken compensation and moved on. Every single one had received a personal apology and acknowledgement that Skybridge had failed them. That night, he pulled up the viral video one last time, watched himself being dragged down the aisle, blood on his temple, hands cuffed too tight, expression carefully controlled while 100 phones captured his humiliation. The video that had 42 million views and counting, that had become a teaching tool in bias training across 7 airlines, that had forced an industry to confront what it preferred to ignore. He watched the whole thing, let himself feel the anger and the hurt and the exhaustion of having to prove over and over that he deserved basic dignity. Then he closed the video and opened the documentary trailer Maya had sent. Saw his story interwoven with Dr. Robinson's and Reverend Brown's and the 32 other victims who'd chosen to rebuild instead of just walking away. The trailer ended with Marcus's words from the press conference 6 months ago. Dignity isn't something you earn, it's something you're born deserving. That was the line people remembered, the quote that had been printed on protest signs and shared on social media and referenced in congressional hearings. 5 words that had become a rallying cry for anyone who'd been told they didn't belong. Marcus turned off his laptop, lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd fly back to Seattle, return to running an airline that was smaller but stronger, that had survived the most public reckoning in aviation history and emerged with credibility rebuilt from honesty instead of image management. He'd lost employees who preferred convenience to justice. Lost board members who valued profit over principle. Lost 8% market share and $50 million implementing reforms. But he'd gained something that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. The knowledge that when tested he'd chosen integrity over comfort. That when given the choice between settling quietly and fighting publicly, he'd fought. That when the system that made him also tried to break him, he'd broken it back and rebuilt it better. The stitches had healed, but the scar remained. Marcus touched his temple in the darkness, felt the ridge of tissue that would always remind him what accountability cost and why it mattered anyway. Tomorrow he'd keep building, keep reforming, keep holding the line between what the company was and what it needed to become. Tonight he let himself rest, not because the work was finished, it never would be, but because sustainable change required endurance, and endurance required knowing when to pause, breathe, and remember why the fight was worth fighting. Somewhere in D.C., a teenager named Jamal was preparing for the interview that could change his life. Because of Marcus's intervention, he wouldn't have to prove he belonged. He could just be brilliant and let that be enough. That was the legacy Marcus wanted. Not the trials or the convictions or the viral video, but the quiet moments when passengers boarded planes without fear. When crew members treated everyone fairly because the system demanded it. When dignity stopped being negotiable and became operational standard. He fell asleep thinking about that future, woke up ready to keep building it, one flight at a time, one policy at a time, one passenger at a time. The work continued, the reforms held, and slowly, painfully, the industry learned what Marcus had proven. That justice and profit could coexist if you had the courage to demand both and the integrity to accept nothing less.